Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis, where we take a look at the important articles which have appeared in the international edition of today's The Hindu newspaper, understand their relevance for the mains as well as the prelims perspective, and also discuss the issues which are in the periphery of that article from where questions can be asked. In that discussion, we shall also be discussing how to create answers out of these and how to basically expect what kind of questions can be asked in the examination. Now, the annotations of the PDF shall be available on the Telegram channel, which you can download after the session. Now, today we are going to have a discussion for close to around 10 different topics. Now, most of them we will discuss in greater detail. We will analyze them in greater detail, and a couple of them for shorter purposes because of their relevance in the prelims. So, out of this, the top 8 that you see, that is something we are going to discuss in greater detail for relevance in the mains examination, starting with misinformation, a bigger threat than the COVID uptick. It is an editorial piece which has appeared in the newspaper regarding what is the reality of the recent COVID uptick that we have seen. So this is relevant for your GS paper 3. Then after that, strengthening the US-India subsea cable agenda. Now, regarding the subsea cables and their importance at the same time, this can be linked to geopolitical power play which is going on in the region of the Indian Ocean. So why is it relevant for India and why is it an opportune time for India to capitalize on the subsea cable market? This is relevant both for your GS paper 2 as well as for your GS paper 3. Now, then monsoonal woes. The impact of monsoon in the northeastern part of the country is something which is in front of us all. Large amount of casualties have occurred, and basically you have a complete disruption of life in many of the northeastern states. So that becomes relevant for your GS paper 1 under the portion of geography as well as your GS paper 3. Now, an article which has been written by Nirupama Rao talks about India's strategic arc must leave Pakistan behind. So, what is the way forward for a country like India, which sees itself to be a global superpower in the coming days? How it can basically remove itself from the hyphenation of Indo-Pak, and how it can extract itself from the India-China-Pakistan trifecta, which plagues the region of Southeast Asia and South Asia in general. So this is again relevant for your GS2. Now, why has net FDI inflow plummeted? Now, this has been an observation which has been carried out for a long period of time now. Various articles have appeared in the newspaper time and time again. Today, some important data pointers and rather interesting graphs have been indicated, which tells us the reality of FDI inflows in India. So this is again relevant for the economy portion, GS paper 3. Then how is President's rule imposed? This is a straightforward portion relevant for your prelims at max and maybe slight importance in your GS paper 2. So that is about the Article 356 and the history associated with imposition of President's rule. Now, obviously, as a candidate, you don't need to be aware of all the various different president rule imposition, but you need to be aware about the conditionalities which are required for the fulfillment of or invoking Article 356. So this is relevant for your GS2. Now, owing to the Russia-Ukraine war, one of the unexpected outcomes has been a kind of militarization of the region of Europe, and that has been exaggerated by President Trump being in office. So, France has offered itself to be a nuclear umbrella power in the region of Europe. What does that mean? And how will that change the geopolitical and the geostrategic tensions which already lie on a knife edge in the region of Europe? Again, relevant for your GS paper 2 for the portion of IR. How do heat waves gripping India impact country's labor productivity? Now, this is an important, at the same time, very interesting article which relates the conditionalities of heat wave to the conditionalities of economic output and what will be the overall implication. Now, heat waves is something for which numerous articles have been written, but here we will talk about the vicious cycle of poverty that it induces in many parts of the country, which will be very important for your mains examination, relevant again in GS paper 1 as well as your GS paper 3. And couple of articles associated with prelims along the way we shall also be discussing. So this is the overall comprehensive coverage that we will attain to finish today. Having said that, many of you have been facing a lot of issues in terms of answer writing, because in the questions which are framed in the mains examination, there are various different keywords used such as justify, elaborate, elucidate, critically analyze, and so on. So despite the fact that we have been discussing the mains type of questions in all these articles, many of you have found it incredibly difficult to put the pen to paper and to start answer writing. Now, answer writing is one of the most important parts in your civil services preparation. Otherwise, your entire target will only be up till prelims, and nobody gets any achievement just by clearing prelims. You need to clear the mains examination. So in order to help you understand what to do when you write an answer, what is the 70-30 rule in terms of answer writing, and how do we in a way declutter these particular keywords, today we are going to come up with a video regarding the basics of answer writing, where not only do we explain these keywords with the help of the PYQs, but at the same time talk about what should an ideal introduction look like, what should be there in the portion of conclusion, and how conclusion of one answer needs to be completely different from the conclusion of another answer. So do take a look at this video. It will be available on Unacademy IAS English platform, and that will help you initiate at least the practice of answer writing. Now, having said that, let us start with the first article. Now, as I told you, basically this is an article which is relevant for your GS paper 3. But here, rather than looking at the bulk article, many of you are also trying to read the articles and newspapers on your own and finding it slightly difficult. So in the 1 minute, let me tell you how to break down this article in case you are reading it on your own and you want to improve your newspaper reading skills, how to break it down so that we are able to recollect and retain what has been written in the article for a longer period of time, and if possible, prepare notes as well. So when you take a look at a very lengthy editorial piece like this, oftentimes you get lost within the first paragraph itself, and you lose your pivot by the time you come to the second paragraph. You forget what the article had been talking about. So in that case, how do we approach the article? So before directly jumping into the article, I would always suggest read the headings at least couple of times. Okay, so read that. Now, it might seem very mundane and an innocuous task, that what is there in reading the heading? Misinformation, a bigger threat than COVID-19 uptick. It is very clear. But then when you read it again and again, you realize that there are certain keywords here in this particular article, which without reading the article gives you a story of what is included within. For example, one of the important keywords is that of misinformation. So misinformation will be dealt with in this article in some way or the other. And the other important key phrase in this is the COVID-19 uptick. So these are the two key phrases or the keywords around which the entire article will revolve. So now you have got a bearing. Now, anytime when you read the article, if you feel lost, take a look at the heading, misinformation or COVID-19 uptick. Every sentence would be dealing with that. This also gives you an idea about how to write answers. Your answer has to revolve around these keywords as well. Now, secondly, when you break down this particular article, you will observe some small minor headings also to be associated. For example, epidemiological facts, numbers in perspective, on vaccination, right? So that provides you with a breakdown of the article and also which portions to expect where. So when you break down this article broadly, any article in the first paragraph will involve the context. Under what context is the article mentioned? Secondly, in the context itself, chances are that background will be mentioned, right? And also in the context itself, you will find global examples which are mentioned. In most of the articles, this is the trend which is followed, and that is the art of writing itself. Then after that, you have the main crux of the article. That is, why the uptick? Why is there an uptick in terms of COVID-19 cases? Thirdly, it is a comparison in between COVID-19 numbers and the numbers indicated by other various different diseases, like let's suppose tuberculosis, respiratory illnesses, and so on. So, other examples or perspectives, right? And then every article at the end will have a kind of way forward. Way forward. So broadly, if you break this article into the broader terms like this, it will be easier for you to read also, easier for you to make crisp notes. So let us understand what this article tells us about. Now, we all know the reality that the COVID numbers in India are rising at an incredibly fast rate. More than 30 people have basically died due to the impact of this COVID-19 virus. Now, the impact which has been felt in the regions such as Hong Kong, Singapore, etc., has been much more exaggerated as compared to India. Now, this has struck panic in various parts of the country and various parts of the globe as well regarding what this new variant of COVID-19 virus is about. And should we again follow the policy of a complete lockdown, isolation, or should we start a new phase of vaccination drive in order to prevent the citizens from being exposed to this new variant? So there are a lot of various information which has turned into misinformation nowadays, which has been spreading around, particularly in the realm of the WhatsApp University. Now that has created a lot of panic. So first of all, let us understand the context under which the article has been written. As I told you, this talks about the background, the present realities, and if possible, also the global scenarios. So COVID-19 cases in India have risen slightly since mid-May 2025. Now, the rise which has been happening is not a new, completely new variant which has come up. For example, if you recall the COVID days, the horror days of the COVID, you would recall that there were three prominent waves of COVID. Now, the second wave, which was particularly deadly, was the Delta wave. And the third wave, which was the Omicron wave, which came up around in the month of December, January, and so on, when the COVID was waning about. Omicron was not as deadly as the Delta wave. But at the same time, the virus in the Delta wave had very different property as compared to the COVID virus in the Omicron variety or the variant. Because of genetic mutations, the virus tends to gain various different attributes. And that is something which triggers a new wave or a new phase of infections. Now, one of the moderate or a milder wave was the Omicron wave. And the present viral spread of COVID-19 and the infections, they are basically of the type of the Omicron sublineage with no new variant of concern. Okay. Now, similar increase has been reported in countries like Singapore, Hong Kong, Thailand, and even South Korea. So under that context, we have basically got this article. But then there must be a curiosity that why is it so that suddenly the COVID-19, or why is it so that the new variant has come into existence or the existent variant has been spreading in a new manner? This did not happen last year. This did not happen in the early part of this year. Why now? So basically, the epidemiologists who study the spread of these viruses, they have narrowed it down to three broader points which can explain that why suddenly there is a surge in these viral infections. The first reason is the seasonal pattern of respiratory viruses. Now, this is a very basic point. That is something that even you can associate based upon your day-to-day experiences or examples. Suppose you consider yourself and members of your family. Now, it will happen or it might have happened that you would be exposed to flu, right? You would be suffering from flu-like conditions. Now, you would have experienced that in certain months, the probability of you getting infected by flu is much higher as compared to certain other months. Every member of your family starts falling sick. The cough and cold issues, the viral diseases, and the viral infections, they continue to increase during certain months. It is not the case throughout the year. So there is a certain seasonality, associated with the virus. That is when they become very active. That why do they become suddenly very active? That is when they find the abiotic conditions around them, that is the conditions of temperature, etc., to be very conducive to be able to multiply. And mind you, they will multiply only in the case when there is a host body which is available. So there is no denying of the fact that there are various different host bodies which are available with a low immune system response. And that is where the virus tends to live for some time. And over that period of time, the virus also tends to mutate. What is this mutation of virus, by the way? Let's suppose you consider in a very basic simplistic term, let's suppose you consider a cellular organism like this. Right. Now, it has got certain properties or attributes. Now, it has attacked a host body and a host individual is impacted by this virus. Now, the host over a period of time will develop an immune system response to kill the virus. The body automatically tends to develop that immune system response. Now, as the virus, they get impacted by the immune system response, they also simultaneously start to learn how to defeat that defense mechanism of the enemy, that is the host body. So that is when some of the attributes are gained and some of the existing attributes are lost, which makes the virus change its form, change its impact. And that is what is known as the viral mutation or the cellular mutation. As a consequence of that, the virus is no longer effective or can no longer be defeated against certain set prescriptions. They need a larger dose of antimicrobials, antibiotics, and so on to subdue them or kill them. So this is a kind of a mutation which happens in almost all the various different types of virus. For example, again, something that you can relate from your day-to-day life. For example, you would have experienced that, let's suppose when you were younger, around in your early teens or much more younger when you were a tiny tot, when you would suffer from a cough and cold infection, a simple pill, a cough and cold pill, or a simple tablet, one tablet would take care of the entire infection and you would be fit and fine within a couple of days. But then now when you relate to that, when you suffer from cough and cold and a viral fever now, it is much more devastating and much more weakening in impact. It weakens you. Why? The tablets are the same, but the tablets are not effective anymore. Why? Because over a period of years, as your body has been popping these pills, has developed that defense mechanism, the virus simultaneously is also learning from your body and developing a mutated variety. So this is a kind of a natural cycle of one defense mechanism overpowering the other and each one of them learning from each one, and that is when they gain a kind of a temporary superiority. So that is the case of the virus mutation. This virus is RNA nature type, and that is why it can mutate very, very easily, which makes the spread also very easy. Now, we also have to keep one thing in mind. Why do we have and why do we observe increased number of cases in the recent times? And that can be attributed to increased amount of screening, awareness. Awareness is very important because during the time of the COVID pandemic, you had a general perception that anybody, even if they would be suffering from COVID, they would shrug it off that it is a simple case of cough and cold. Right? They would never get themselves tested for the fear of the unknown. They would never get themselves vaccinated as well. But in today's day and age, even if there is a slight cough and cold, people prefer to get themselves tested to be on the precautionary side. So there is an enhanced screening and testing infrastructure and a network which has been laid, and that is beneficial. So because of that, all the cases, almost all the cases which are out there, they are getting tested, screened, most of the cases rather, they are getting tested, screened, and that adds up to the national number. That is why you see thousands of infection cases. But at the same time, if you will observe, the number of people who have recovered successfully within a week, that number is also very, very high. So that puts things in perspective that basically this is just a natural trend of an Omicron virus variety of the COVID, which has gained some amount of mutation and that is impacting the humans. Will it be that destructive? No. Should we need to worry? No. But should we need to be cautious? Absolutely yes. Now here, there is also the talk about hybrid immunity. What is this hybrid immunity? You would have heard about herd immunity during the time of the COVID days. And what is that immunity? So, again, bringing the flu virus, influenza virus example into the perspective. Let's suppose you are getting impacted by the flu virus. You will recover within a week, right? Even if you take medicines or if you don't take medicines, cough, cold, and fever will go away within a week. But that had not always been the case. We humans, we have gained immunity from these viruses over a period of many years after being exposed to them almost continuously. So that is a kind of an immunity that we have gained against some of the virus, right? Influenza virus being one of them. Now, in the case of COVID, you basically have this some amount of exposure. So, exposure is there for various individuals at different levels. We have been exposed to the COVID virus, either someone in our close vicinity or we ourselves have suffered from the COVID virus and the COVID infection. So, there is a kind of an exposure. Exposure can be direct or indirect, right? But there is some exposure due to which there is the exposure immunity which has been developed. There is the kind of immunity due to exposure, as is the case with influenza virus. But at the same time, you also have the case of immunization, that is vaccination. Almost all of us would have received 2 doses of the vaccine along with the booster dose. So that is the case of immunization, right? Now, this has basically added onto the immunity that you see in the public. Now, the immunity is gained not only because of exposure and not only due to vaccination, it is because of a mixture of both. That is why it is termed as a hybrid immunity, due to which the impact of the virus will not be that deadly. In fact, some of the findings, early findings, have also indicated that the people who are getting impacted by the virus, now again, these are unconfirmed reports, by the way, there is still a lot of peer review which is going on. But some of the unconfirmed reports have indicated that many people suffering from this early spread of this virus are actually the ones who have not taken multiple dosage of the vaccine or have not gone for the booster dose of the vaccine. There, in their body, the immune system and the immune system response is slightly muted, and that is why they are more susceptible to being impacted by the virus. Now, to put things into perspective, you have various hundreds of cases which come up on a daily basis in the case of the COVID pandemic. But is it really that bad when we think about it? It is bad. But in a country like India, where we have more than 800 cases of TB, tuberculosis, every day, hundreds of people get impacted and influenced by the viral infections on a daily basis. We have close to around hundreds of people who die because of the infectious diseases other than COVID on a daily basis. So that puts things into perspective that yes, the COVID virus is spreading, but we are a country which already has these infectious diseases. Not to say that we should relax, that everything is fine. But at the same time, we have to be aware that the impact is not as exaggerated as it is made out to be. There are various calls and appeals from all the quarters that shut everything down and start with the mass inoculation drive or the mass vaccination drive once again. That is the misinformation and the panic which can always impact the societal psyche in general. So, what is the way forward that should be pursued in this particular case? And what is it that one should follow as a policy measure? One of the first way and the most important way is increased testing and screening. Increased screening and testing. Right? Also, study of the patterns. Where is it spreading? Why is it spreading? Which is the general public in which you find greater incidence of the virus? which are the pockets within a particular city where you have more number of cases. So that pattern study helps you understand that where that epidemic or the kind of a pandemic spread can germinate from. And if required, the node isolation can also be followed if you understand the pattern. Other than that, we also need to enhance the healthcare facilities response to the infection. And that is very, very important. So you need to stock up with the medicines, you need to stock up with the case of even as required in the delta wave oxygen cylinders and so on if conditions get out of hand. So that is where revamping the medical facilities becomes a priority. Okay, facility stocking up of the supplies, ensuring that you have enough ICU beds, CCU beds which are available, enough care is available, the paramedical staff are trained, the infrastructure is there. That is very, very vital. And if this is ensured, then one can ensure that this minor spread or this spread of the COVID virus is reduced to a minor blip. Okay. So in this article, if you break it down again, why this is in news, the context, then why is it that it is spreading right now, the reasons for the breakout, then the perspective and the concept of hybrid immunity, perspective with regards to other communicable diseases, and what is it that we need to do going ahead forward. This is only thing which is required out of the 1,000 worded article out there. So if you follow this, you will be able to read the article quickly, at the same time summarize it beautifully. Now, coming to the next article, which has also appeared in the editorial section of the newspaper, and that is strengthening the US India subsea cable agenda. Again, a broader glance at the article. Broader glance at the article, broader glance at the topic gives you an idea that this is something associated with subsea cable, undersea cable. So if you don't know, the prime objective should be what is undersea cable. Try to find that out. And then the importance of that subsea cable. So if you take a look at it, again, the first portion is the one talking about the context, some of the background, global examples, then part of global public good, benefit of having a gain in the subsea cable network, India's potential as a transit hub, and the steps which are needed or the way forward. So the entire article can again be broken into these 4 pointers. Do that for every article and you will understand how to approach the newspaper without facing a burden, right? Importance of subsea, importance of cable, subsea cable rather, then India's role and challenges, and then after that, way forward. This is what the entire article is about. So let us take a look at each of these. Now, first of all, when we talk about it, okay, we have some of the doubts. So basically, we will take a look at some of the doubts that you have after discussion of few of the topics. Okay. Now, when we talk about when we take different pills, the virus also mutate. If let's suppose you take pills on a very regular basis, the virus does mutate. Yes, that is correct. This is basically for the portion of your GS2 and GS3. It has been mentioned in the intro portion of the topic slide itself, that which portion of GS is that important for. It is important for both GS2 as well as GS3. Now, here, when we talk about undersea cables or subsea cables, now these have become very important modes of communication in the modern day and age. They end up transmitting important and vital data from one part of the world to another. And in effect, if you somehow sabotage this, if somehow this gets disrupted, then in the modern times, a country can be plunged into the dark ages again. Because connectivity is one of the key bulwarks of empowerment in the modern century. So if you don't have proper access to communication, and for communication, one of the important medium is undersea cables. Now, all the countries have been paying a lot of attention to improve the infrastructure of the undersea cables. Now, what are these undersea cables in simple terms? You basically lay down these cables. For example, let's suppose when you go for a fixed landline connection or any of those kind of communication networks, you will find that or internet connection, a cable is laid, and that cable transmits the information from the center, and you are able to receive that information. Think about this being done on a global scale. Now, where do you lay the cables on a global scale? You cannot lay the cables through passing through various different countries. That will make them open to sabotage, degradation, and various suspicious movements as well. That is why the countries, they basically lay the cables on the sea floor, on the seabed. Now, if you observe this particular map in particular, you will observe that there are various different routes of undersea cables which are given here. Now, most of these routes, they simply follow the maritime routes which are there. Maritime routes as in the routes which the ships take across the world. So they are used for laying down the cables as well. And it is a complicated exercise. It is not something which is done overnight, that today evening you decide that I want a cable connectivity between India and Yemen, and tomorrow morning somebody will provide that connectivity. It is a very cumbersome process. Just to give you an idea, in order to lay an undersea cable connecting India, there needs to be close to around 50 clearances required from various different ministries. And the time duration taken for that clearance is close to around 5 to 6 months, sometimes even 1 year. And also understand, let's suppose undersea this has broken. For example, last year you had the Houthis, they basically attacked in Yemen, they attacked the undersea cable in the region of Red Sea and they sabotaged it. They basically broke it down. Due to which countries like India, they faced a lot of issue. Various different connector or network providers, they had to reroute the network through the other cables. So that is when the requirement and the need for having greater number of cables comes into the fore. But at the same time, what if a cable is broken? Can't we repair it? We can. But in India, we don't have that capacity. We are dependent on the manufacturers and the operators in countries like Singapore and China. And even when you raise the request for repair, it is not as if tomorrow morning a repairman will come knocking on your door that where is the cable broken. No. Again, it takes a duration of 4 to 6 months for that process to go through. So this is a cumbersome process. And this is a very complicated process in order to complete, but at the same time, very important. Just to give you an idea about the importance of this, look at the number of subsea cables emerging from China. China, at an incredibly fast rate, has been laying down these undersea cables, multiple of them, in order to ensure a network resilience. That even if there is sabotage on a couple of them, the rest should function effectively. And they basically become one of the listening and the receiving pods for the Chinese TCP as well. So that is where other countries are gaining a fast movement over this. But even when we talk about private organizations like Meta, now Meta has embarked upon a multi-year plan having more than 50,000 crores of investment to lay subsea cables only in the region of Indian Ocean. It is a part of a larger plan to connect all the various continents together. But think about it, a company, a private organization is spending thousands, tens of thousands of crores. That tells you the importance and the reasons why we in India should take it with utmost seriousness. If you take a look at the subsea cable map around India, you will observe an anomaly. Now, while you have majority of this cable network in the Indian Ocean passing very close to India, observe this image. Many of these undersea cables, they pass very close to India, but not all of them come to the Indian shores. Even where they come to the Indian shores, most of them are restricted to the region of Mumbai, a few of them in the region of Chennai. That's it. So basically, that leaves us very vulnerable. If let's suppose there's a natural disaster, like let's suppose a storm surge or a kind of a coastal flooding or multiple repeated cyclones, these cables can get snapped. Let's suppose Mumbai is exposed to a sabotage by Pakistan or is exposed to a terrorist activity or a natural disaster that can put us in complete blindness. So that is where we need to ensure that we are more resilient. Rather than all the receiving stations being in Mumbai, we need to have a diversification of that. So that regions like Kochi, etc., they are also prioritized. Now, why is it that there is a need for India to expand its footprint when it comes to cable, undersea cable? What is the importance of that? There are multiple aspects. One is digital sovereignty that we have talked about. That in the present day and age, you cannot afford to be digitally cut off from any particular part of the world, even for the slightest of duration. So you need proper connectivity and you need to own that connection. It should not be that you are dependent on the Chinese providers or the Singapore providers in order to give you connectivity. And we are already lagging behind in this. Please keep one thing in mind. Consider a country as large as India. The number or the amount of internet usage that we have in India, that is very, very high. But when you take a look at the number of undersea cables which are laid around the country, that is close to around 15 to 17. Whereas a much smaller region like Singapore, think about it, a city country, right? Now, in Singapore itself, you have more than 21 cables coming in. So, in the modern day and age, when the utilization of the connectivity is going to increase, we need to step up. We need to at least, if not be able to match China, at least be able to fulfill the requirement that a $4 or $5 trillion economy would need going ahead into the future. Right? Now, there is an increase in demand for broadband nowadays, broadband connectivity for every purpose. So, again, there is an increase in demand. If the passage flow of connection is not keeping up with the demand, there will be choke or a choke point created. So, as a consequence, there will be a price rise in terms of data availability. There will be disruption of services. Disruption of services can always turn out to have a kind of an economic loss associated as well. So in this case, right, need to keep up with the demand. Keep up with the demand. Otherwise, you have economic damage. Economic implications are observed. Okay. Now, then after that, India basically sees itself that if you take a look at the naval doctrine, the doctrine of the Indian Navy, India sees itself, visualizes itself as a net security provider in the region of Indian Ocean. In the region of Indian Ocean, starting from the region of Gulf of Aden in the west, close to the region of Red Sea, all the way to the Strait of Malacca. So from Bab al Mandeb near Gulf of Aden to the Strait of Malacca, India sees itself as a net security provider in the Indian Ocean. Now, thereby, India can be a net provider of information and broadcasting even in the region of Indian Ocean. That will provide us with a kind of a soft power that is very, very much important in the 21st century. And it will be a counter to the Chinese influence. The Chinese have been laying these cables fast and at an incredible pace. So when they offer connectivity to countries or regions in our neighborhood, that will always pose a security and a strategic threat to us, both in the short run as well as in the long run. And there is a long turnaround time for MROs, the maintenance and repair operations which are there. In case of a sabotage, there is a very long turnaround time of 4 to 6 months. And that is something we cannot afford. Again, it can bring about economic disruptions. So these are some of the agendas or the points which indicate why India should pursue this with a greater amount of force and a greater resilience. Now, at the same time, we face certain challenges. What are the challenges that we face? So first, there's increased competition. Competition not only by sovereign nations, but at the same time with digital organizations and companies like Meta. So very soon you will come across a scenario where the private players will lay down these cables at such a fast rate that you laying down these cables will be costly for you, and you providing the internet connectivity will be costly for the people. To simplify this, let's suppose tomorrow, given the amount of money that Meta has, or for that matter, the amount of money that Elon Musk has. Tomorrow, let's suppose there is a kind of a connectivity plan which is laid down by these companies. They have laid down 50 to 100 cables in the region of Indian Ocean. Now they will be able to provide that connection to you at a cheaper rate, right? At that point of time, when India will decide that now we will start laying cables, it will be costlier for us. So it won't make economic sense. But at the same time, we will take connection from these private players, but the remote, or rather, the control will be with those private players. You don't want that. You want digital sovereignty. And for that, you need to step up and lay these cables before the digital monopolies they come in. There's a lack of technological superiority itself when it comes to India and our prowess of laying down these cables. We don't have that technological expertise. We are still reliant on foreign equipments and foreign players, the subcontractors which lay down these cables. We need to have that development in-house, because please understand, these undersea cables, they are going to be viable and important for the next 50 to 60 years. So this is the opportune time, while we are investing in maritime shipping, increasing the number of ships that we are building, we need to develop vessels and the technological prowess to lay down and monitor these cables at a larger go. And also, we have concentrated landing zones. In India, all the cables, they land in the region of either Mumbai or in the region of Chennai. They need to be diversified. Not only will that boost the connectivity in various different areas, that will also provide us with a kind of a resilience against natural disasters, terrorist attacks. So this is basically the undersea cable scenario across the globe, why it is important. Now the article basically argues that what one can do is leverage the Indo-US relationship, attract foreign direct investment into this sector, and ensure that this is taken up with a faster pace. But on the other hand, when we are already embarking on the path of Atmanirbhar Bharat, why not develop this R&D, research and development, in-house and gain that capability and self-sustenance? Okay. Now, then we take a look at the practice question. Undersea cables constitute the modern day's critical infrastructure. India cannot afford to be left behind. Comment. Now here, this is a 10-marker question. The question has asked comment. Now when you take a look at a question comment, it is different from describe. It is different from elaborate. It is different from elucidate. It is different from critically analyze or justify. Comment is basically where you analyze this particular statement, look at the pros and the cons, and also provide a way forward. Okay, so here undersea cables constitute the modern day's critical infrastructure. What do you write in the intro in this? Intro has to address the main part of the question. The main keyword of the question is modern day's critical infrastructure. The relevance of undersea cables is what has to be mentioned in the intro. 2 to 3 sentences, not more than that. Then when you come to the portion of the body, in the body portion, you have to start to discuss about importance of connection and the importance of network centricity in modern age, where everything is backed up online, be it financial transactions, be it public infrastructure, be it health records, everything has been going and migrating online. So there is an urgent need to maintain that. That is something which you have to mention. After that, you have to talk about India's role. That compared to the size of the economy that it has not developed as much capability as, let's suppose, a Singapore. Then you have to talk about the need for developing, where you are addressing that cannot afford to be left behind. So that is where in the second part of the body, you discuss the need. Okay, all the needs that we have discussed, right? In the conclusion, you summarize, because it is a 10 marker, you don't need to go into much detail. In the conclusion, talk about the fact that disruption, whether by natural or by artificial means of the undersea cable, can render a country incapacitated, which a rising power like India cannot afford. The cost is too high. In order to ensure and make ourselves resilient and self sustainable, we have to ensure that this is a sector which is not only worked upon by us, but is completely owned by us. With that, you can end the answer. Okay? Now, then coming on to the next article, which has also appeared in the editorial section, that is about monsoon woes. Now, this is basically the case of the kind of devastation that monsoon has brought in the region of the northeastern states. Now, the early onset of monsoon has happened this year. For that, we have done a detailed video as well, which you can take a look at it on YouTube, regarding why the early onset of monsoon has happened and what actually demarcates the onset of monsoon. When is it that we say that onset of monsoon has happened? You can take a look at the video in greater detail. So here, basically, the onset is declared when you have rainfall in the region of Kerala coastline or the Malabar coast. But within a couple of days, moist winds enter from this region, deflected from the mountains of Myanmar. They enter through this area. Once they enter through this area, that is when they basically collide with the kind of land masses or the orographic barrier that you have. Now, these are very moist winds. They have covered thousands of kilometers over the water body. So their humidity level is very, very high. As soon as they hit the barrier, they cause immense amount of rainfall. So the amount of rainfall in the region of Sikkim, Assam, Arunachal Pradesh, etc., Meghalaya, it is very, very high. Now, due to this, the region around, for example, the Lohit River, Lohit, which is a left bank tributary of Brahmaputra, which joins river Brahmaputra at the town of Sadia. So Lohit, and then you have even the Barak River Valley. Both of these river systems, they always get flooded during the month of June. And this time, because the onset has happened earlier, the progress has been rapid. That is why the flooding has happened in the month of May itself. So you can think about it that the conditions in June will be much more exaggerated. Now, why is it that there has been excessive amount of rainfall in the region of the Northeast, and what is the impact? First of all, if you take a look at the reason, there is an early onset. Now, early onset is triggered by various different factors like MJO, ENZO, etc., something that we have discussed in detail in the video that I have shown you. But then, primarily, this early onset can be targeted to a broader circumstance of global warming, isn't it? There is a global warming which has happened. Then after that, you also have the excess amount of rainfall. It is actually concentrated, right? It is not spread over, it is concentrated. So a role has to be played, and a significant role is played by the mountains or the orographic barrier. The orographic barrier in the northeastern region, they provide a funnel shape. Funnel shape. So if you take a look at the mountains in the region of the Northeast, you'll find that the mountains, they provide a kind of a funnel shape where the moist winds can enter, but they are unable to exit. So they end up dumping all the moisture that they have carried, the entire load in that small region and for a short duration. That causes almost immediate floods. So the orographic barrier by Mikir, Bareil ranges, the Himalayas, the Purvanchal, all of them creates a funnel shape, increasing the amount of rainfall. Also, you have the case of concentrated rains, where all the heavy rain is concentrated in the few days. Now, this concentrated rain is caused because of the change in land use pattern. What does that mean? The regions which were forested, those regions basically have been converted into a kind of, let's suppose, urban center. So the green cover, the water cycle which would follow, that would regulate the amount of rainfall and moisture supply. Now, there is massive amount of deforestation which has happened in the northeastern states, due to which now you don't have that buffer or the neutralizing effect of these green cover. So that is why all the rainfall is concentrated in a short duration. So that is not very beneficial. So rest of the days you have dry condition followed by excessive rain. Mind you, this year, by the way, even though northeastern regions are getting flooded, the prediction tells us that northeastern states are going to receive slightly less than average rainfall in this monsoonal season. So, despite expecting or despite the fact that they can experience less than average rainfall, all the rainfall being concentrated in these months will render the situation unmanageable. So, what are the impacts of this concentrated rainfall? You have floods, which is the easy outcome. All of you can guess excess rainfall will lead to floods. But at the same time, the floods and the massive amount of rainfall will also, in a way, exaggerate or increase the chances of mass movement. Mass movement like landslide, isn't it? Landslides will become very common. Now, one other aspect of such increased rain in short proportion means many areas get overflooded. Followed by a dry condition, these overflooded regions, they continue to hold a lot of standing water. And in these standing water, what breeds? Diseases. So they can become increased or they can become susceptible to increased spread of diseases, right? Diseases like malaria, chikungunya, dengue, they become very, very common. So that is the case of the impacts. Obviously, infrastructure that is being lost, public infrastructure, private infrastructure. So loss of life and property is massive, right? Property is massive. But then that is why if we face this year after year, there is a need for urgent planning. So what should be the way forward so that we don't experience this year after year? What is it that we can do going ahead into the future? Very simple. Proper prediction, right? Prediction should be to the point so that immediate evacuation, etc., can be carried out, right? So when you do a prediction, the modern Doppler radars which are installed, Doppler radars don't only give you an information about the amount of rainfall or where the region will receive rainfall, how much rainfall will be received, that also detail is given. So prediction models have to be worked upon so that we have some time with us to mitigate the damage. Other than that, increased green cover. Now, when you increase the green cover, that will improve the natural absorption ability of the soil to take in excess amount of moisture, and that recharges the groundwater as well. Otherwise, in the northeastern regions, what is being experienced is that during these rainy days there is flood. After that, there is dry condition. The natural streams, etc., which are used as a source of drinking water, they dry up, leaving the citizens in a lurch. So that is why increase in green cover should be ensured. To ensure that there is no sudden change in land use pattern, what can also be done is that proper environmental impact assessments for infrastructure needs to be managed. We need to consider the long-term impact of, let's suppose, a highway, etc., which is being built. So, environmental impact assessment needs to be carried out. Other than that, you also need slope stabilization. What do we mean by that? So, we know that much part of the Himalayan region is made out of sedimentary rocks. In the event of excess amount of rainfall, water percolates, it permeates, and that is when the slides become very common, the slide, the slump, etc., causing lot of damage. Now, prior to the monsoon month itself, there needs to be an annual study which needs to be done that which are the areas which are vulnerable to slides. And stabilization method should be adopted, either by a steel mesh which holds the rocks together, which is done in the Western Ghats, particularly in the Konkan coast, or you can go for a kind of controlled slide, whereby let's suppose you see a rock which is overhanging in excess rainfall, it will slide down. Break the rock now itself. Evacuate the region, break the rock, disintegrate the rock, ensure whatever portion has to slide is done in a controlled manner, so that large scale damage and destruction do not happen. So these are some of the things that can be done going ahead, moving into the future to ensure loss is not annual. That is the way forward. A question. Discuss the impact of the early onset of monsoon in northeast India and mention the impact created. Right. So it is about the impact of the northeastern, early onset of northeastern monsoon. So here in the intro, what is required to be written? You have to talk about the early onset of monsoon in northeastern India. So early onset of monsoon in northeastern India. So basically you talk about that due to certain conditions like creation of a low pressure zone in the central Indian region, the conducive conditions or the collaborative conditions of MJO, positive IOD, etc. There is sometimes the monsoon which comes in much earlier or at an advanced date as compared to the predicted time. This brings about large amount of rains, but at the same time has got various different implications. This will be your intro plus first part of your body. Now, in the body, you start mentioning that in the northeastern part of the country, the rains they start to happen within 1 to 2 days since the rains begin in the Kerala coastline. So there is a general 1 to 2 day lag between the onset in India and the onset in northeastern region. Then you start mentioning the reasons, because it is a 15 marker question, the reasons for the early onset and also reasons for heavy rains. The reasons that we have mentioned in the slide earlier. Those reasons, the funnel shape of the mountain, changing land use pattern, orographic barrier, everything that you mentioned. After that, once you have mentioned the reasons, then you talk about the implications. Implications, crop destruction, flood, avalanches, landslides, everything you mentioned there. Now, it is a 15 marker question. UPSC has given you some amount of freedom. So this is where you follow the 80:20 rule or 70:30 depending upon the demand of the question. 80:20 is what? 80% you write about what is asked in the question. If you have scope, if there is 250 word to be written, 20% write something which is related to the question but not asked directly. So for example, here the question is not asking you to talk about solution or way forward. But in the context of the topic, way forward is important. So while 80% of your answer has to be concentrated on the fulfilling all the demands of the question, 20% can talk about what is the way forward. Right? And that is where eventually that way forward will lead and merge into your conclusion, where you talk about the importance of ensuring that the region is not so vulnerable because it impacts a large population and maintains vital water connectivity and so on, everything, water security and so on, can mention. Okay, so like that 80:20 rule in 15 marker questions is something can. What do you mean by concentration of rainfall? Can I mention the name of the rivers Lohit and Barak? Absolutely yes. You also mentioned the river names like Tista. In Sikkim recently, the casualties which occurred were in the case of river Tista, which is a tributary, a right bank tributary of river Brahmaputra. So you do mention the names of the rivers. Concentration of rainfall means that earlier you would have, let's suppose in a month, 20 centimeter of rains per month, right? Now that would mean 1 centimeter of rain every 2 days or every 3 days, so that there would be enough time for the water to be absorbed by the ground system. Now what do you have is 10 days are dry. In 11th day, you will suddenly receive 10 centimeter of rainfall, causing floods, landslides, etc. After that, again 10 days will be dry. So all the rainfall is concentrated within the set of 1 or 2 days. Okay? How deforestation cause less rainfall? Deforestation basically impacts the water cycle. The water cycle, when it gets impacted, moisture supply in the air gets impacted. How does it impact the water cycle? Through the process of evapotranspiration. So once the cloud formation gets impacted, rains will get impacted. This is something we have discussed in the portion of environment ecology multiple times as well. You can refer to those videos. Now, India's strategic arc must leave Pakistan behind. Now, this is a very interesting article which has been in the murmurs for some time about what should be the step ahead for a country like India. Because there is again, after the Pahalgam attack and what followed in the form of Operation Sindoor, Pakistan has been celebrating that it has finally managed to achieve a hyphenation between India and Pakistan. What is hyphenation between India and Pakistan? That if, let's suppose, some strategic thinker in the West, in UK or US, they are thinking about the region of South Asia, they refer to it as Indo-Pak region, right? That is something that India does not want. Why should we be coupled with Pakistan? After all, that is a basket case. Pakistan's economy is floundering, its productivity is scanty, and it is nowhere when it comes to the global spectrum of important nations. But then when we talk about India, we are a rising economy. Our economy is still expanding at one of the fastest rates across the world when you talk about major economies. Our per capita income is doubling in every decade and a half or so. So, yes, we are improving. We are becoming important hubs of global multilateralism. So, in that particular case, we would never want to be hyphenated or linked with a country like Pakistan. But for that, we need to follow certain measures that we have been already following. And in order to bolster our presence and our position going ahead, we need to be very sure about the policy followed. So that is what the article is about. Strategic arc. What is strategic arc? What should be our future movement, future positioning? That is something which is being talked about, strategic arc. That our positioning should be such that Pakistan is rendered irrelevant and India is considered to be a pole center. Now, we have to understand that going ahead into the 21st century, role of Indo-Pacific has been increasing. As one of the greatest strategic thinkers, Alfred Mahan, had said, whosoever rules the seas rules the world. India, sitting atop Indian Ocean, is a maritime power. Our navy is amongst the strongest when it comes to the Indian Ocean region. So we have a strategic importance, not only for ourselves, but even when it comes to the world order going ahead into the 21st century. Majority of the trade in the Indian Ocean passes very close to the Indian coastline. So the role of India is set to increase quite exponentially in the coming years and decades. That is owing to our location. Now, when the role of Indo-Pacific is going to increase, India's importance is also going to increase. And when India's importance is going to increase, so is going to be our overall role in global peacekeeping. Global peacekeeping. Right? Then maintenance of strategic balance vis-a-vis China. Strategic balance. Only yesterday, you had Emmanuel Macron talking about, the French president talking about the need to improve relations with India going ahead when it comes to critical technologies and when it comes to even defense architecture. So our strategic importance also grows. Then also in terms of economic counterbalance. Counterbalance. Because we have seen that China follows what is referred to as the checkbook diplomacy. that we will buy you out. A country like Bangladesh is an ideal nation for that matter, where the country's economic woes have basically served Bangladesh on a platter in front of the Chinese table. Now, what China will do is issue certain amount of money to Bangladesh, some amount of money that China will give as a loan, right? Long term loan. Bangladesh will get the money. Bangladesh will be happy for a few days. And when it will not be able to repay that money, as a consequence, China will start owning up some portions of Bangladesh's sovereignty. Now, in the case of Pakistan, it is a clear cut case of neo-colonialism, right? That is colonialism in the modern day and age, where Pakistan has basically rented itself out for Chinese usage. That do whatever you want in our country. All that we need is some money from you, and all that we need is the defense equipment. If you recall what happened with us in the 1600s, that is something which has got incredible amount of parallel to be drawn in the case of Pakistan in the present day and age. The article argues that India needs to highlight this form of neo-colonialism in front of the world in order to expose the Chinese, in a way, dire intentions or unholy intentions when it comes to helping out the other nations. That in itself separates India from Pakistan. We are a country which is self reliant. We are a country which tends to improve based upon each and every mistake, because we see ourselves as an independent pole and not simply a vassal state of any other major power. And that is something which is very different from Pakistan's aim. Pakistan seeks to keep itself relevant by, in a way, poking India, isn't it? If an elephant is prominent in a particular region, think about a bee which wants to gather headlines by saying that I have poked the elephant. That is the role of Pakistan. It is that continual irritant in our growth story. But it is also a reality that as long as Pakistan continues to put itself on our parity, it will continue to needle us to such an extent that our growth momentum can be halted or at least can be interrupted. In light of these scenarios, what is required by us is to grow to such a fashion and in such a manner that we leave Pakistan to be irrelevant. For example, today, regardless of what happens in the region of Bangladesh, right? Regardless of whosoever comes in power, whether the army takes over or whether you have the BNP or the Jamaat, whosoever comes in power, we will be impacted only to a certain extent. We won't have a perpetual security threat emerging from there. That is how irrelevant we have to make Pakistan as well. So that is where the Pakistan challenge can be dealt with, not only to grow, but to tell the world as well that look, India and China, they are the upholders of stability in the region of Asia. Obviously, you cannot count out China, China being the larger power in the region of Asia. So India and China have to play that major role. When India and China play that major role, you automatically put Pakistan on the back burner. And that is where an understanding with the Chinese is also required, because the perpetual nightmare or the kind of worst scenario that the military operators in our country have to think about is the fact that what if there is a two-front war? What if there is war by Pakistan at the same time China also in? So we have to ensure with our diplomacy, with our handling of the polity, that this does not happen. So for that, we need to ensure that we provide that center of stability in the region of South Asia, and Pakistan is considered to be a simple irritant. So that is where we need to eliminate the India, China, Pakistan strategic triangle to India, China pole of stability. Pole of stability. Because we have to understand that the relation between China and Pakistan, even though it is considered to be a strategic relationship, both the countries, they sing peons about it, but still, it is very transactional. Think about it. China uses Pakistan as a test bed for its equipments and military equipments as against India. Now, Pakistan having suffered quite significantly during this Operation Sindoor, now what has been the outcome? China understood that this is the best way in which we can test our weapons against India's defenses. So, China has offered the stealth fighter jets at 50% discount to Pakistan, the J-20. at 50% discount to Pakistan. These jets, which were supposed to come into Pakistan from next year, now will start arriving from the month of August itself. This is a clear cut of case of a transactional tactical relationship rather than a strategic partnership. So if you provide that stability in South Asia, obviously this relationship will run out its course, because Pakistan, being a basket case economy, will again follow the same trajectory. Now, that is where the role of multilateralism is also something which can be exploited by us as a nation. How? So, we have to ensure, and again, something which is a learning out of Operation Sindhu, that in the time of need, not only do we have to be self sufficient and self reliant, but at the same time, we need to have enough international partners that one US should not make a difference. Right. So that is why countries like UAE, and that is where our increased bonhomie with the Middle Eastern nations, increased and improved relations with the Middle East countries have come to the fore. It had come to help us. So a kind of quad relationship that we have, quad with Australia, Japan, and US, then relation with France, Saudi, UAE. So all these kind of relations and the triangles and the quads which are being formed, that is very vital in the modern age to ensure that we have strategic sovereignty and independence, which is maintained. We need to avoid military overreach, but maintain strategic deterrence. Why do you have a powerful military? Powerful militaries are not there that if tomorrow China attacks, we will have a blow for blow attack. No, that is not what modern day warfare is about. Powerful militaries are maintained. Military supremacy is maintained, that nobody dares to attack you. That is deterrence. So we need to ensure that deterrent edge over the region of Pakistan. And for that, technological prowess, increased self production, all of these things are required. And then, role of narrative building. We need to maintain a narrative. We need to tell the world the India story. We need to tell the world about dreams that Indians have. We are a status quo power. We do not wish for any land which is somewhere else. We are very happy with the land that we have. And that is what our philosophy has also been, that if required, we will not go for violence. And that will be our last possible course. If required, give us little portion of land, let us live in peace. But then, if push comes to shove, that is when might will be used to convey the message. So we have been that power. And that has been the case for not only decades, but hundreds of years. That needs to be conveyed to the world. And that is where our diplomatic outreach has to be much greater, rather than a kind of an afterthought around a terrorist attack. That needs to be a continuous badgering and a hammering of agenda which needs to be done on global. Only then can we ensure we are extradited out of the swamp or the kind of marshy situation that Pakistan loves the Indians to be in South Asia. Okay? Now, after this, coming to the next article. Why has net FDI inflow plummeted? That is, why is it that the net FDI inflow in India has declined or has decreased? So when we talk about foreign direct investment, so basically that foreign direct investment in India has declined. Now this is something which is indicated by the various different charts. So what is the context of it? The RBI bulletin shows a mixed trend in terms of FDI. Foreign direct investment, a foreign entity, an investor, an institution, they invest in the country, in infrastructure projects, in any organization, etc. So that is foreign direct investment. So India received an unprecedented $81 billion in gross FDI inflows. Now you might think $81 billion is massive. So why do we need to worry? These are inflows. At the same time, there have been outflows as well. So if you subtract outflows from the money which has come in, that is what gives you the net FDI, right? That is the net FDI. That is inflows minus outflows. So when you talk about the inflows, there have been $81 billion. But if you subtract the outflows, the net FDI is close to around $353 million. Million. right? So they have been minuscule. The number has dipped, less than $1 billion. So there are certain reasons why the outflows have increased in India and the net inflows have decreased. That is something which is relevant for your economy portion in GS paper 3. So this is these are certain data pointers and charts which have been indicated in the article. That is something I want you to look into. So when you take a look into this, observe the trend that the gross inflow has also marked a decrease. It is not as if the gross inflow, which is $81 billion, is at its highest. This has also declined, right? Why is it that the inflows of FDI declines? Maybe the country is not attractive enough for investment. Newer technologies are not coming up. There's a lot of regulatory hassle. There are a lot of compliances which needs to be ensured. There's a predatory tax which is imposed. So due to which the various organizations, foreign investors, they are finding alternate avenues, isn't it? So observe the net FDIs, however. Look at where the net FDIs have gone. Almost plummeted because the outflows have been massive. So this is again an indicator of the continual decline in the net FDI. And even the gross fixed capital formation. What is gross fixed capital formation? GFCF. So let's suppose there is an investment which has come in to build or construct a road, right? Or an airport or something like that. That is a capital asset which is being created. So that inflow has supported capital formation. So FDIs, when they happen constructively, they help in capital formation, which is in the long-term benefit of the economy. It helps you provide that economic productivity and increase GDP as well. But then when the money is parked in your country only for a short duration, right? Somebody is parking that money in the country, bringing that money in the country, looking at the stock prices surge or the share market surge. Immediately when the surge is high, they withdraw that money in order to book profits. So that money exits your country. So the capital formation does not happen. So in the long run, you don't benefit out of such FDIs. So that is the indicator of gross fixed capital formation. So observe that gross fixed capital formation has also been on the declining trend. So the FDIs are not productive. So if the FDIs of $81 billion are coming in, they are not productive. So what are these FDI? From where this money is coming in and how is this money coming in? So most of the money which is coming in is basically the case of private equity investors or venture capitalists investing in firms. For example, let's suppose Zepto gets an investment, right? Lenskart gets an investment, Flipkart gets an investment. That is the VCs and the PEs who are paying that, who are investing that in the market. Now, why is it that someone will invest in a Zepto or a Lenskart? Someone sitting in US, why would they invest in a Zepto or a Lenskart? To ensure that the company grows. Once the company grows, they will take that money out and they will book the profit. So again, in the long run benefit, it is not beneficial for the country. So this private equity and venture capitalist fund, that is increasing in proportion of what is the FDI. For example, in 2009-2010, if you compare 2009-10, out of every 100 rupees which would come as FDI, much would be there for capital formation. Around 12 rupees would be by the venture capitalists investing into these areas. Today, that is basically 2021-22. Out of 100 rupees which come in as FDI, 75 rupees are basically by venture capitalists. So it is a short-term money which is parked. Now you have to think that investors, they will put the money in those areas where the tax is less, which is increasing, the companies are growing. So as soon as they get the profit, they take that money out, right? So gross FDI to GDP ratio, that has also fallen from 3.6% to 2.1%. The net FDI, however, has dipped more sharply. We have seen it is only around $350 million now as compared to the billions of dollars which used to be. Now, this signals declining investor confidence and poor FDI retention. Now, why is it that there is disinvestment or the money which is going out in one way or the other? Why is it so? So there are multiple reasons. Profit booking after strong stock market returns. As soon as the stock markets they return good, there is withdrawal. Shift towards other markets with better returns, other emerging markets. Regulatory or tax based dissatisfaction. Private equity and venture capital funds, they are dominant. They are anyways for short run. FDI often flows through low tax jurisdiction. So you have attractive destinations like Hong Kong, Singapore, etc. That is where the FDI will come to. It may be strongly tied. It may not be strongly tied to the real economic activity. So there are various reasons why there is disinvestment or that exit and exodus of money. So what is the way forward that a country like India can adopt to ensure that FDI inflow is reliable, is also continued? So improve the regulatory environment, make it more compliable, ease of doing business to be improved, reduce disinvestment trends, encourage FDI in productive long run sectors, for example, R&D, simplifying taxation and regulatory framework, and restore investor confidence. So these are what can be followed to ensure that FDI is not a short run, but ensures a long-term gross capital formation. Okay. Now, a simple article, straightforward article, relevant for your GS paper 2. How is President's rule imposed? This is about Article 356. This is in news. The context of it is that a delegation of 10 MLAs from the Manipur Assembly met the governor of the state and pressed for the formation of viable government because the next election is still 18 months away. So that is where they want a viable government to be formed. Now, Manipur is under the president's rule, owing to the complete breakdown of law and order which the state has been witnessing for many months now. It was this year when there was president's rule which was imposed under the Article 356. So this becomes important for your prelims, Article 356 and its conditions. So Article 356, the president may take over the governance, president owing and obviously under the guidance and the kind of recommendations of the central government, may take over the governance of a state when it cannot be carried out in accordance with the provisions of the constitution, when the governance of the state cannot be carried out under the provisions of the constitution. President may make such a proclamation based on the receipt of a report received from the governor of the state or even otherwise. Otherwise, what do we mean by otherwise? Otherwise basically means that a situation arises where there is a clear-cut failure of the state machinery to implement or comply with any directions given by the union government. That is the otherwise condition, right? Now, proclamation of the president's rule must be approved by both the houses of the parliament within 2 months from the date of its issue by a simple majority. Simple majority is important. Within 2 months is also important phrase from which prelims questions are framed. Once approved by parliament, the president's rule continues for 6 months from the date of proclamation, unless and until it is revoked early. Right? At max, it can be extended by 6-month tenure every time by passing it through simple majority, 6-month tenure at a time, at max for a period of 3 years, not beyond 3 years. So this is the condition for Article 365. Now, Article 365, when the Constitution was being framed, the makers of the Constitution, so much so, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar thought of Article 365 to be a dead letter, that it should never be used. And we should have a situation where this is never to be brought into practice. But over the period of multiple decades, starting from the 60s onwards, we have seen multiple misuse and mismanagement of Article 356. inability of a government to perform well in Lok Sabha from a particular state would meant basically invoking Article 356, putting that state under president's rule. If let's suppose, as was the case, very historic case in the region of Karnataka, if the state leadership is not on the same page as the central leadership, Article 356 would be invoked. In many of the times, the recommendations of the chief minister would also be sidelined in this case. So Article 356 has been mismanaged and has been misused. Now, the judiciary, the High Court and the Supreme Court, kept itself aloof from these practices for almost initial 4 to 5 decades. Right. Now, initial 4 decades was where there was not much interference of the judiciary. The cases went up to the doorsteps of the High Court and the Supreme Court multiple times. And eventually, the Supreme Court came up with the landmark S.R. Bommai case. Now, after the S.R. Bommai case, the courts and the judiciary have served as a watchdog in order to monitor the proper functioning and the proper aspect of Article 356. They have made this to be under, or they have put it under judicial review as well. That if there is a precedence rule which is imposed, if the conditions or if the circumstances are malified, the intentions are malified, then they can be questioned in the court of law. So that is when, after that, the number of this misuse has reduced. The amount of this misuse has reduced. The court in its judgment of S.R. Bommai held Article 356 should be imposed only the event of breakdown of constitutional machinery, not simply a law and order problem, but when the functioning of the institutions are not possible, they are not possible, only then impose this. It also held that imposition of precedence rule is subject to judicial review, which was earlier not followed. Now, it further ruled that Parliament approves the imposition of precedence rule, the Legislative Assembly should not be dissolved and can only be kept under suspended animation. So this has been put to greater use and better use in the case of Bihar, Uttarakhand, and Arunachal Pradesh, where the courts have brought the administration to account. So going ahead into the future, for proper administration of the states and to ensure that federal structure and the basic structure of the constitution is maintained, a strict guidance and jurisdiction as imposed by the guidelines of the Supreme Court under S.R. Bommai case, that should be followed. Discrepancies, if at all, should be addressed in the court of law, and thereby there should be a kind of revoking of Article 356 wherever the cause and the intentions are malified only. Then will we ensure that faith is reposed and imposed not only in the judiciary but also in the system of governance that the country has. Okay. Now, next article. What would a French nuclear umbrella mean for Europe? Now, this is an article which talks about the aspect where France has pitched forward this idea that we will have a nuclear umbrella for protection of Europe. Now, mind you, this is a departure from the existing known circumstances where all the countries would demilitarize, all the countries would actually promote disarmament and so on. But ever since the Russia-Ukraine war broke out and followed by Trump's individual personality and the aspect of protectionism which has come into the US foreign policy and the inward-looking US foreign policy now, Trump has basically signaled and US has signaled to the world that all the countries should fend for themselves. This is where France has basically, or Paris has pitched this idea that they have more than 290 nuclear warheads. So as a kind of a credible deterrence, they will deploy those warheads in various different countries in order to ensure that there is no such aggression that they have to face. That is the case of French nuclear umbrella. Now, is it a strategic balance or an overreach? Why this strategic balance? Owing to volatile geostrategic conditions, volatility in global order. This is one. Okay. Then after that, the withdrawal or retreat of US. right? Increased vulnerability of various nations, due to which these kind of ideas are floated. Now, is it an overreach or is it a kind of a balance? Mind you, when France says that we will deploy nuclear weapons across various different states of Europe, wasn't this the exact trigger point that Russia did not want, and due to which the entire Russia Ukraine war began? Because NATO wanted to expand its defensive or aggressive posture into Ukraine. And that is something that Russia was not comfortable with. So, if Russia was not comfortable with NATO weapons and the NATO allies having the weapon system close to its border, how will it be comfortable with France doing the same? So, it can put the global order in much more vulnerable situation. But if you put yourself in the shoes of countries like France and Germany, now should they be vulnerable to Russian attacks? No, they have to defend themselves. So for them, it is a strategic balance. For countries like Russia, it is an overreach. So it depends upon which side of the spectrum you stand upon. Now, implications of the world order. The implications will be, now there will be increased breakdown of NATO. NATO as an alliance has run its course, particularly in Europe, owing to the policies by Trump and the policies by the US. So withdrawal of NATO would mean rise of individual powers in Europe. Germany has increased its defense budget. France has increased its defense budget. Countries like Hungary, they have increased their defense budget. So all the countries are increasing their defense spending, which will ensure that yes, the military industrial complex will thrive, but more people will be put at risk. And that is not a kind of a world order which you want to be living in. So in a way, it will increase the volatility as well as the susceptibility of the region of Europe to triggers and various different types of incitations. So here, increase vulnerabilities in Europe. Vulnerabilities in Europe. Then, other than that, increased defense spending. Defense spending. Other than that, you also have case of increased trigger points for conflict. For the okay, these are some of the points which are the likely implications going ahead. This is one of the expected questions in this year's mains examination, particularly GS paper 2. Now, how do heat waves gripping India impact country's labor productivity? Now, heat waves, what are heat waves? When you have the average temperature to be around 4 to 5 degrees Celsius higher than what is expected to be normal, that is a condition when it is a heat wave. However, in the plain region, if the temperature exceeds 40 degrees Celsius, in a hilly region, if the temperature exceeds 30 degrees Celsius, an absolute heat wave conditions are declared. Now, due to global warming and increased amount of heating, heat waves are becoming more common and more prominent not only in India, but across the globe. In India, as per the report by ILO and various organizations, the impact in manufacturing sector is immense. Every 1 degree Celsius rise in temperature can impact the manufacturing contribution by 2%. The agricultural productivity of crops get impacted. So what are the reasons for the heat wave? We know that the reasons of the heat wave, one is global warming, right? Now that global warming, there you can consider the portion of increased emissions. Now this is something which is not covered in the article, but something that you should know. Increased rate of urbanization, construction of infrastructure, etc., has created heat islands where during the night time also the temperature is very high due to excessive concretization and excess absorption of heat. Deforestation has removed the cooling regions of the ground. Right? Then after that, you also have the changing climate pattern. Rainfall pattern. Due to this, the heat waves are becoming very, very common. One of the most prominent reason is rapid and unsustainable urbanization, which is creating urban heat island, whereby as compared to the rural regions, the urban areas experience a 4 to 5 degrees Celsius higher temperature. Now, the economic aspect or the economic impact is massive. When you talk about the economic impact, what are those? So, first of all, if you think about the agriculture, you have loss in the crop of wheat. For the past couple of years, wheat crop has experienced a decline due to early onset of heat wave. Even this year, onset of heat waves, which is under normal circumstances expected to come up in the month of April, the onset of heat waves in this year has been from the last week of February itself. So that is where the impact is massive. Other than that, you also have, due to these heat waves and distributed or the disturbed pattern of rainfall, even kharif crop like rice, their sowing gets impacted. So as a consequence, wheat and rice being the major food crops, this substantially impacts the agriculture income, which comes down. Now, as the agricultural income comes down, this pulls down the rural demand in the economy. And rural demand is very important for the vitality of the economy. Because if you consider India, 65% of the population is rural. If 65% of the population impacts a plummeting demand, that means the production in India will not happen to the same rate. More people will be left jobless. But then other than that, let's suppose someone, a laborer, working in a factory or an industry. Now, due to rising temperature, what happens? Work efficiency goes down. Sleep deprivation, diseases, etc. So efficiency, right? So that would mean loss of income, isn't it? At the same time, heat waves also make you susceptible to diseases. When a worker is impacted by diseases, heat stroke or anything like that, again, spend or expenditure on healthcare, that increase. Now, when the spend on healthcare increases, that means the disposable income, the amount of money that I have to spend or to buy, let's suppose a refrigerator or an air conditioner, that declines, isn't it? So disposable income declines. When disposable income declines, again, demand. So in all of these cases, observe, all of them are leading to a decline in demand, right? And that will impact the consumption patterns and production patterns in the economy, due to which there is basically lack of productivity, unemployment. Unemployment would mean what? Again, less income or limited amount of income, again further decline in demand, again further joblessness. So because air conditioners, the factories will employ less people now. So it is a cascading impact that heat waves have. So what should be done? It is a force of nature. So we need to have a proper standard operating procedure for working conditions in the factories, on the work floor, etc., to ensure proper hydration, proper cooling conditions are maintained. And if we want to maintain our efficiency as an economy, we need to maintain efficiency as a human capital. So that needs to be stressed upon by the state governments. They need to come up with the standard operating procedures which the other companies should follow and organizations have to follow. This again is one of the expected questions in this year's mains exam. Now coming to some of the articles relevant for your prelims, couple of articles. Now border tension and inflation dragged the May PMI, the purchasing manufacturers index, to a 3-month low. Now purchasing managers index, PMI, is basically calculated based upon a survey whereby the industry heads, they are queried, they are questioned about the demand that their products have, the price that they have to face, then the employment that is created. Based upon a host of these questions, sentiment of the economy is gained. If PMI is less than 50, means economy is contracting, contraction in economy. If the PMI is greater than 50, that means the economy is expanding. If the PMI is equal to 50, no growth, no contraction. PMI for the month of May is 57.6, which indicates that the growth is there but is pulled down due to inflation. Now, there has been rainfall, seasonal inflation in various different products, and also because of the border tension, few of the products have experienced a sudden pickup in inflation. So that is where many of the prices are at a record high, due to which consumption patterns have been impacted. These are the reasons why PMI is slightly dragged down, but whether it is a long-term phenomena or a short-term blip, that needs to be mentioned after we measure or after we understand the PMI for the month of June. So do follow the trend of PMI on a month-on-month basis rather than the numbers themselves, which gives you an idea about the viability of the economic. Okay? Now, last topic of the day, that is phytoplanktons overfed on iron, depleting ocean nutrients faster. Now, you see, when you talk about phytoplanktons, they are amongst the major generators of oxygen in the world. When it comes to oceans, phytoplanktons are the prime source of oxygen generators. Now, what are these phytoplanktons? So, if you consider a region of the ocean, now these are microscopic algal species. Now, these microscopic algal species, in the presence of sunlight, sunlight is required by majority of the phytoplankton, not all, majority. And then you also have the intake of nutrients, nutrients like iron, right? Dissolved nutrients in water. Under the presence of nutrients and in the presence and availability of sunlight, the phytoplanktons, they thrive. They carry out the process of photosynthesis, forming the base level of the marine food chain, but at the same time ensuring supply of oxygen in the water. However, what the study has indicated that over the past few decades and years, there is increased amount of anthropogenic emission, that is human caused emission. Now this human caused emission, anthropogenic, human based, anthropogenic emission. Now these anthropogenic emissions have been on the rise, due to which many of the iron particles, they have been deposited over the oceans. Now the sudden outburst in the iron particles, what it has done is, it has increased the amount of phytoplanktons. The phytoplankton population has exploded. Now when the phytoplankton population explodes, will it satisfy itself only with the incoming iron which is out there? No. As the population increases, it requires more food. So it will start devouring the existing nutrients. So the nutrient availability in the ocean, has gone down. Why? Because, again, listen to this. The pollutants have increased, which has exploded the population of phytoplanktons. Phytoplanktons not only consume these pollutants, but because they are so much larger in number, they start consuming the existing nutrients as well. Eventually, nothing is left in the ocean. That impacts the larger set of species which are dependent on these nutrients to provide them with the strength. So that is where the maritime ecosystem is impacted by the sudden surge in phytoplankton, and that sudden surge in phytoplankton is induced by anthropogenic emission. That is what the question or the article is. Okay, so with that, we come to the end of the newspaper analysis. This newspaper analysis is slightly longer as compared to the expected time, but I hope you understand that many important topics and concepts have been covered here. If you are satisfied with the content covered, please don't forget to click on the like, share, and the subscribe button and put that in the comment section below. We meet again tomorrow. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you.